So this is going to be the second in our series on the Rambam, on Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. The Rambam wrote three major works and many other essays, letters. The Rambam was very prolific. And his great fame in the Jewish world came due to his writings. The Rambam also wrote major works on medicine, the medicine of his time, naturally. The Rambam was seen as an expert in pharmacology and drugs, herbs. The Rambam was a believer in pretty much in natural medicine. I don't think that in the 12th and 13th centuries, without the diagnostic tools and without the technology that we have today, that any other type of medicine really was possible. But the Rambam was recognized as being an outstanding expert in it. The Rambam was also a believer in preventive medicine. In other words, he prescribed, we even find it in his books of halacha, in the Mishneh Torah, the Rambam prescribes good eating habits, good sleeping habits. The Rambam says you should sleep 8 hours a night. Some people are more machmir, they sleep longer. The Rambam himself, naturally, like all doctors, never took his own advice. And the Rambam is such a strong believer in preventive medicine, in the fact that to a great extent we control what will happen to us, that he goes to extremes. Many times you take a good rational point and you stretch it to its extreme and it becomes a little less rational. But the Rambam confronts the fact that we find in the Chumash Bereshis, we find in the Sefer Bereshit that there were 38 people who lived very long lives. 969 years, 960 years, 800 years, 600 years. So how do we deal with that? So most of the Meforshim say that nature and life itself was far different before the period of the flood, before the Mabul, and therefore everything that happened before the Mabul can't be judged by our standards today. But we still find that people lived a long time. Avraham Avinu lives 175 years, Yitzchak lives 180, Yaakov lives 147, and he complains that he had a short life. Yosef lives 110, Moshe lives 120. How do we somehow deal with that when by the time of Moshe Rabbeinu himself, in his famous psalm in Tehillim, says, Yemei shnoseinu bohem shivim shona. The average lifespan is 70 years. V'im bigvurot shmonim shona. And if a person reaches strength, if he's specially endowed, then it's 80 years. Moshe lives 120, Aaron lives 120. The Rambam's answer, which is very rational, but it's so rational that it becomes irrational, is that these people took care of themselves. They ate food that was good for them rather than just good food. And they got enough sleep, and they did exercise, and they took care of themselves. We find later in the Talmud that when the rabbis met someone of advanced age, they always asked them, Bameh harachta yomim? How come you're so old? Which is a question my little grandchildren always ask me. Zaidi, how come you're so old? So the Talmud never answers the Rambam's answer that people took care of themselves. or that, you know, they did exercise every day, or they didn't live under stress, whatever. That's not the answer. The answer always given is that a person had the merit of good deeds. He had the schar of a mitzvah, or that the Lord kept him or her alive for a certain purpose. And that's why the person outlived, so to speak, the actuarial table. But the Rambam doesn't adopt that. The Rambam adopts rather his idea, as I mentioned, the preventive medicine, of natural medicine, of the fact that people took care of themselves. If you take care of yourselves, you'll be fine. I think in the modern world today, we certainly tend to ascribe a lot to genetics. Statistically, I mean, it's not a rule of all statistics don't apply to any one individual. But statistically, if a person comes from a family that's long lived, has parents that lived to a great age, and he has grandparents that lived to a great age, so then statistically, the person will also probably live to a great age. And unfortunately, the converse is also true. That people that come from short-lived families, so then their genes, so to speak, are against them. The Rambam doesn't speak in those terms at all. The Rambam speaks only in terms of health, of diet, of the avoidance of stress. And in his medical works, the Rambam is very, very strong in the use of natural herbs, medicines. He has long treatises on stomach problems, intestinal problems, the use of diuretics. He was aware, for instance, that diuretics will reduce a person's blood pressure and will reduce a person's stress. All sorts of things that, for his time at least, were top-of-the-line medicine. Now, the wonderful thing about medicine is that it changes every 20, 30 years. And what was accepted and held to be valid in one generation, the next generation many times is refuted. I remember when I grew up as a child, thank God my only major experience in a hospital was that they took out my tonsils. Every Jewish child had his tonsils taken out in America in the 1930s and 1940s and even 1950s. It was a rite of passage. The ice cream. It was, then they gave you ice cream to eat, right? You remember that, right? And so everybody had their tonsils. So today they tell you that it's terrible to take out your tonsils because of the fact that it makes you susceptible to all sorts of throat infections and other things. So I can't get my tonsils back. But medicine changes, and therefore to view the medicine of the Rambam, to view the medicine of Maimonides in the light of CAT scans and MRIs and laser surgery and all of the other technological advances that we have in our time is really not fair, because it doesn't give us an assessment. The Rambam was noted as a great diagnostician. Now, today, a great diagnostician really reads a computer. By the time the X-rays and the MRI and the blood tests and everything else come back, so you got a pretty good picture of the person and what problem, if any, there exists. But in a world where none of that existed, and you have to look in the person's eyes, or on his face, or the color of the skin, etc., and determine from that, so then being, at least having a reputation as a great diagnostician, was a very, very important thing, and it was a great compliment to his medical prowess that he was able to do so. So those books were written in Arabic. They've been translated in a number of languages. There's a Machon in Haifa that has devoted itself to translating the Rambam's medical works into English. And they can be found in good libraries today if you're interested in looking at it. I have seen some PhD theses written on the medicine of the Rambam, etc. But it's not as a doctor that the Rambam finds his immortality or his fame, but it's rather in the realm of Torah and the realm of being the Jewish leader of his time that the Rambam's immortality was created. So therefore, the major books, the major works that I'm going to discuss with you deal with Torah, that deal with Judaism, with the ideas, especially the Rambam's view of things. When he was a young man and he was still in Morocco, in the caves of Morocco in the Atlas Mountains, of hiding from the Almohads, the Rambam begins his famous commentary to the Mishnah, the פירוש המשניות to the Mishnah, commentary to the Mishnah. And the commentary to the Mishnah is written in Arabic. So here we have a departure already, which Rambam's an innovator in many, many areas. Until that book, practically, there were almost no major works written in Arabic in halacha. There are a number of exceptions. One exception is the book of Emunos Videos, that was the book of beliefs and opinions written by Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon in the 9th century. Now, Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon's book of beliefs and opinions is really a book of philosophy. It's a book of Torah, but it's a book of philosophy. It's a philosophical treatise on the beliefs in present in Judaism and how they differ from the beliefs that are present in other religions. And the book was written in Arabic. It's been translated into Hebrew. It's also been translated into English. It was published by Yale University Press. Dr. Samuel Rosenblatt, who was a rabbi in Baltimore, who was the son of the great Chazan Yossele Rosenblatt, did the translation, and it has remained pretty much the basic translation in English today of the books of beliefs and opinions. So that was written in Arabic. Also, there was a small halachic work written by Rav Hai Gaon that we also find in Arabic. That could be that it was written in Hebrew originally and translated into the Arabic. But that's 11th century. But basically all the books that were written in Aramaic, Aramit, and in Hebrew. Now, Aramaic was always seen as the sister language for Hebrew. In fact, in the tradition of the Jewish people, Aramaic also has a holiness to it. And we find, for instance, in the Torah, many Aramaic words that were used. And the Jews in the Second Temple times spoke Aramaic. That was the lingua franca. That was the language that they spoke. There were different dialects of Aramaic. The Palestinian, Yerushalayim dialect that you find, for instance, in the Talmud Yerushalmi is different than the dialect that is found in the Talmud Bavli in the Babylonian Talmud, though basically it's the same language. There still are people left in the world today that speak Aramaic as a language. In northern Syria and in other places in the world, there are still vestiges of people who speak Aramaic, and there were Jews that still spoke Aramaic as their language as late as the beginning of the 20th century. But the language of culture and of wide readership and intellectual discussion at the time of the Rambam was Arabic. Europe was far behind the Middle East in all matters of culture and civilization. It was just crawling out of the Dark Ages. And the Muslim world was at the peak of its intellectual prowess. One of the tragedies in our time is that the Muslim world got frozen. It not only was overtaken by the West, but it remained frozen in what it was before. And because of that, therefore, we many of the problems that exist in world society today and many of the conflicts are simply due to that fact. It's very difficult in the 21st century to deal with 15th century people. And because of that, problems abound, as you all know. Now, the Rambam took and wrote this commentary to the Mishnah in Arabic. He wanted to do so because he wanted wide distribution of it. It was a language that people read. We, like in the United States, most of the Torah books that are written in English because of the fact that that's the language that's spoken and read and that people respond to. And therefore, Arabic was the English of its time. It was also the language that represented culture, poetry, prose, style. All of that was Arabic. And the Rambam, interestingly enough, wrote Arabic with Hebrew characters. Something that we find Jews did with other languages as well at different times in the exile. There are Jews that wrote German with Hebrew characters. But we have a great deal of the Rambam's own handwriting has been preserved, especially from the Geniza in Cairo. And there it's always written in Arabic, but it's always written in Hebrew letters. And since Arabic and Hebrew are similar languages in both Semitic, and they're similar in sound, etc., and they have many common words, so then it became acceptable amongst Jews to do that, to write Arabic in Hebrew characters. Now, in order for the book to come to the Ashkenazim, in order for it to come to the European Jews, it could not remain in Arabic. And therefore the Rambam had translators, people who took the Arabic version and translated it into Hebrew. Now, Hebrew sprinkled with Aramaic, became the language of the Torah scholar. The masses didn't know Hebrew very well except for the prayers, but the Torah scholar was always the person that knew Hebrew because the Torah works concentrated on Hebrew. And one of his translators was a Jew by the name of Rabbi Yehuda al-Kharizi. There's a street named for him in Rehavia, in my neighborhood. And he was a linguist and he was a poet, Spanish Jew. And he translated Seder Zroim, the first section of the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah. He translated it into Hebrew. But the Rambam had official translators who translated his other works, the Mor Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, and other letters and things that he wrote, that translated them into Hebrew. And they were the Ibn Tibon family. Now, it was Shmuel and Yehuda, Ibn Tibon, father and son combination. They were Provençal Jews, Jews who lived in Provence. They were great fans of the Rambam. They corresponded with him. The Rambam saw their translations. And to a great extent, they became his official translators. In our time, there have been new translations. There was a great Jew here in Yerushalayim. His name was Rabbi Yosef Kapach, Kafich. And he translated the פירוש HaMishnayos from the original Arabic into Hebrew. And in his work, he points out always the differences of nuance that exist between his translation and other translations, some of which really are major in terms of understanding what the Rambam wrote. The problem with all translations is that the nuance never comes across. The languages are very, very difficult to interchange. And if you have any doubt, you'll look at the subtitles on this video or any other video and shown here in Israel. And if you know the English and you see how they translate it into the Hebrew, sometimes it's funny. Because idioms don't translate. It's just, a way of speaking. Nuances, very difficult to get it across. Now, there are some people who are expert translators. The people, for instance, who translated Solzhenitsyn into English. So that's fabulous because you feel the author. Carries through. Even though you don't know Russian, and I'm certain that we miss a lot of it, but nevertheless the whole package somehow comes through because it's not just a word-by-word translation. Is able to capture the emotion of the words as well. So there are people who are great experts in it, but as we see, I'd say probably the most famous mistranslation in the history of the world, from which an entire religion almost has been built, is the idea of the virgin birth, based on a pasuk in the Navi Yeshayahu, in which the Navi refers to an Alma, Ayin Lamed Mem Hey, who will give birth. Now, the word Alma in Hebrew means a young woman. Does not mean a virgin. A virgin is a Tula. However, when it was translated into the Greek, into the Septuagint, the word that was chosen had also an alternative meaning, a young woman, or it could also mean a woman that's a virgin. And then when that in turn was translated into Latin, it's like playing telephone. So if I start by telling you something, by the time I go around the room, then when they tell it back to me, that's a different story completely. So then it became fixed as being the virgin. And this is a matter that Jews have brought up to the church for 1,500 years. But in the 19th century, the church became more and more enamored of Mary and added, the ascension to heaven and all sorts of other things. So it became the Roman Catholic Church is pretty much bound to Mary, not only to Jesus. And because of that, therefore, the virgin birth becomes a tenet of faith. It becomes a matter of belief. So to come now and say that it's a mistranslation, hardly likely that will be accepted, A, and B, it could even be that the church would feel insulted. So, but it's out there. It's in all scholarly works. It's been out there for a long time. But that's part of the problem of translation. So when you have something like the פירוש HaMishnayos, which we all know in Torah works and nuance is very important. You want to explain something, the word that's chosen, the definitive word, how to explain it, carries a great deal of weight. So therefore, the fact that we are working from translation somewhat minimizes the greatness of the book, because of the fact that so to speak, the author, it's hard to see him behind the translation. But the פירוש HaMishnayos is such a great work, and the Rambam is such an imposing figure that with all the problems of translation, we do get a feel of the person. I'll give you an example or two. And the feel of the person is that the Rambam is a supreme rationalist. I discussed that with you here. 38 people live long, so we don't say they live long because of supernatural reasons. They live long because they take care of themselves. So the Rambam is a rationalist in everything. So in the פירוש HaMishnayos is where the 13 principles of faith, which the Rambam enumerated, appears. It appears in the Masechet Sanhedrin, in the last chapter there, and the Rambam has a long discussion of these 13 principles of faith. Now, the 13 principles of faith were not universally accepted. There were great rabbis that disagreed with some of them. They either substituted other ones, or they disagreed with the number of 13, or they disagreed that this is a matter of Jewish faith. Rabbi Levi ben Gershom, Gersonides, and others, Rabbi Yosef Albo and the Sefer Yikorim, were many people who didn't buy into everything that the Rambam wrote. Nevertheless, the defenders of the Rambam were so numerous that it became accepted in the Jewish world that these are the 13 principles of faith. It became so accepted that a hymn was written, the famous hymn Yigdal, Yigdal Elohim Chai V'yishtabach. So that hymn is a recitation of the 13 principles of faith according to the Rambam. And the fact that it was included, so for a long time there were really debates as to whether it should be included in the prayer service or not. And as I remember yet in my youth in Chicago, there were certain synagogues that would still, that was their tradition from wherever they came from, not to recite Yigdal. But today, I mean, we live in such a world that nobody even knows what Yigdal, where it came from, so it's not a problem. And it has a nice tune to it. It's melodious, and you send a child up to sing Yigdal, and everybody's happy. So that's the way that's the way it is. But when he advocated the 13 principles of faith, it was not to unanimous consent, and certainly not to unanimous acceptance. One of the principles of faith that the Rambam discusses is the corporeality of God, whether God has, so to speak, any physical type of attribute that we could discuss. Now, the Rambam's opinion of God is definite. The Rambam begins by saying that we know nothing about God and we cannot know anything about God. And that any attempt, so to speak, to define God is already blasphemous. Because when you define something, you limit it. You have to limit it. That's the basis of definition. And since the Lord is limitless, so we have no definition of him. Now, because of that, the Rambam, for instance, says the 13 attributes that we say to God, Hashem, Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Avchem. God is merciful, God is patient, God forgives, etc. The Rambam says it doesn't mean that none of those attributes apply to God. The only thing that it means is that God is not merciful. He is not patient. But any adjective that you use to attach to God in a positive sense, so to speak, is itself blasphemous. Because if you say God is patient, then you imply that if he wanted to, he could be impatient. Because of this, the Rambam postulates that every place in the Torah, in Nevi'im, in Ksuvim, where there is any reference to God in an anthropomorphic form, God has hands, God has the ears of God, the mouth of God, right? Any of those statements are purely allegorical and have no reference to God whatsoever. It's only since we're human beings and we're limited by our physicality, we don't understand a world that's not physical. We have no frame of reference to begin to imagine a world that is not physical. So therefore, the Torah, so to speak, is forced to say, the hand of God smites his enemies, or that the ear of God hears prayer. But or that God speaks to Moshe, but that really never happens in the sense of what the word means, because God is beyond all of those powers. And therefore it's an allegory. It's l'saber es ha'ozen. It's in order to somehow satisfy our ear that we should have some concept of faith and some concept of God. So therefore we talk in those terms, but God is not to be described in those terms. Now, in Eastern Europe, for instance, amongst the masses of the Jews, God was somebody in the house. Yeah, they would talk to him, complain to him. And God was, he was a fixture. I mean, you have it in the Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevius talks to God all the time, right? So that I remember growing up, when my youth, there still were a lot of first-generation immigrants to America yet, and that was their attitude towards God. And they would say, God, why do you care if, as Tevius said, what would you care if I would be a millionaire? Why would that bother you? Which is a simplistic arrangement with God, right? Well, you can make a deal with God. So God was there. He was there in your house. Now that had a tremendous positive side to it, because of the fact that people could have faith without being intellectual giants. But that's not what the Rambam had in mind at all. To the Rambam, all of that bordered on blasphemy. And that God was such a, it was such a power, whatever word you want to use, that, that we can't approach it, we can't define it, we can't deal with it, and therefore God has no form, no body, and everything that's written is allegory. Okay, so when he said that, we find that he repeats that not only in the commentary to the Mishnah, but he repeats it in the Mishnah Torah as well, in this famous work of Halacha, where he says that believing that God has a form is considered to be certainly a deviation from Jewish faith. So the Ravid, who is his critic and who accompanies him throughout the book, the Ravid says, "Harbe gdolim v'tovim imenu," greater people than he believed that. So how can you say that, that you can sign people to being blasphemous when they were great and believing Jews, just because they believe that somehow God has some form of corporeality to it? That a great Jewish legend, the Jewish joke is that when the Rambam said, everybody that believed like that is, so to speak, a non-believer. That's a fundamental failure, and he's an apokorus. So in heaven, they started throwing everybody out. And then the Ravid came and said, no, the Rambam is wrong. Greater people believe. So then they put them all back in again, right? So that's like nobody's seat in heaven is secure, because we have to see what the halacha here is on earth. But in any event, the Rambam's idea, the Rambam stretched that idea to include the Messianic era also. So we have, for instance, the great verse from the Novi Yeshayahu, Vigor Zevim Kevis, that the wolf will lie down with the lamb. So the Rambam says that's an allegory. It only means that great powers will not abuse their, great countries, powerful nations will not abuse their power and exploit lesser, weaker groups in the world. But the Rambam says basically that if the lamb will lie down with the wolf, you're going to have lamb chops. The world will not change. It cannot be taken literally. And that the lion will be like the cow. That's not going to happen. Those are all allegories, the Rambam says, to the fact that we'll live in a better world, in a world where might is not always right, and where the exploitation of the weak by the strong will no longer occur. So it's interesting. The Ravid comments on that. He says, what will the Rambam do with the pasuk, with the verse that appears in the Torah, in Parshas B'chukosai, V'hashibosi chayaro min oretz. There'll be no animals of prey that will eat anymore in the world. So the Ravid says, what does he do with that pasuk? So everybody asks, what do you mean, what does he do? He'll do the same thing with that pasuk he does with everything else. He'll say it's an allegory. He'll say it's not to be taken literally. Why does the Ravid say that? So apparently the interpretation is that the Ravid agreed with him that if you deal with Navi, deal with Nach, with Nevi'im, Ksuvim, there is room to say that what is written there has to be taken allegorically. And therefore, when you say that the lion will become like the cow, or that the wolf will lie down with the lamb, that we can interpret allegorically. But the words in the Torah itself, words that appear in Chumash itself, that the Ravid holds, you can't touch that. You can't say allegory. And the Rambam apparently holds that even there, you can say allegory. So that's a fundamental view, and there's a fault line in the Jewish world today yet regarding how do we view these things. Literalness of stories, of descriptions, of prophecies, how do we view them? And so the Rambam, as you can imagine, this was a matter of discussion and controversy. I'll give you another example, fascinating example, in the 5th parak in Psochim. So the Talmud, the Mishnah tells us that there were 6 things that King Chizkiyahu did out of his own volition, 6 major policy decisions. And the Talmud says 3 of them the rabbis agreed with him, and 3 of them they said he was wrong. For instance, he made a leap year, but he made leap year the month of Nisan twice instead of the month of Adar twice. So the rabbis disagreed with him because of the fact that that's not how you make a leap year. But one of the things that he did, that they did agree with him, was that there was a book called the Sefer HaRefuot, the book of healing, the book of medicine. And he took it and he got rid of it. He was gonez it. The time-honored tradition, he bought up all the copies, and that ended it, right? So you couldn't get any more. There are certain books now that are hot sellers because they've been banned. So I had a call yesterday from America regarding one of those books, that somehow they knew that I had one. And the guy offered me $250 for the book. So I told him if he'll add a 0, I'll think it over. But he got rid of books, right? So he got rid of the Sefer HaRefuos. He took the book of Refuos and he got rid of it. Wow, what's the Sefer HaRefuos? So why did he get rid of it? Why did the rabbis agree with him? So Rashi says, fascinating 2 views of the world here, Rashi and the Rambam. Rashi says that the reason he said to get rid of the book was because of the fact if anybody got sick, they looked up the sickness in the book and it said take 2 aspirin, or take Advil, take a penicillin, whatever. They took it and they got well, so nobody ever prayed to God to get better. No one ever enlisted God's aid, and no one ever did tshuva, no one ever repented, no one ever looked over. If a person, God forbid, becomes ill, so then the natural tendency is to look and see, well, what did I do wrong? And that can lead to self-improvement. And here, because the Sefer Refuos existed, so then people never really were troubled by these illnesses, because of the fact they could always look it up in the book and it said what the prescription was, what you did for it, and you'd be cured. So that's it. You know, we see in our time also that certain behavior is dangerous because it leads to disease. But once the disease somehow can be controlled or conquered, so then the behavior is forgotten and people go back to doing it. So that's Rashi's opinion. The Rambam in the פירוש HaMishnayos does not mention Rashi by name. In fact, I have not found anywhere in the works of the Rambam that he mentions Rashi by name. Whether or not he was aware, he certainly was aware of Rashi. And whether he saw all of Rashi's commentaries, I don't know, but I would imagine that by the time of the Rambam, in the late 1100s, it was already 100 years after Rashi's commentaries, it was widespread throughout the Jewish world, so I can't imagine that he didn't see them. But his style of learning and of looking at the Torah was far different than that of the French, German, Ashkenazic school. In any event, he does not mention Rashi by name, but he has a long discussion of this, and he says at the end of the discussion that the reason that he talked about it at such length is because a great man said something, which is wrong. So he's alluding to Rashi, but he comes to contradict everything that Rashi says. And he says as follows. He says, if we have such a logic in Judaism, then why should we ever give bread or alms to a poor man, right? Let him pray to God. If he knows that he can come every day by me and I'll give him food, so he's not going to pray to God. Why should he pray to God? And if he knows that, that he can go schnorr every day, 200 shekel, and that keeps him going, so then he doesn't need God, right? He just needs the guys that are going to give him the 200 shekel. So the Rambam says, so therefore what? We should not give charity? We should not give bread? We should tell them to go pray to God? The Rambam says, where do we ever find such a concept in Judaism that allows us to withhold help that we could give to a human being in order that he should, so to speak, improve, that he should pray to God? Now, in later Jewish life, there were such instances where people withheld because they felt that somehow it would help others. So that's that's a very, very taut tightrope that you're walking on. But the Rambam says there's no place for that. So the Rambam says, so what was wrong with the Sefer Refuos then? Why did they take it and put it into the Geniza and hide it and take it out of circulation? And that the rabbis would agree with the king that he did it. But the Rambam says there his rational explanation. He says because it was all quack medicine. It was all medicine that killed instead of healed. The Sefer Refuos, he says, was a fake. It had widespread popularity. We all know that people love alternative medicine. And the crazier it is, the better it is. Somebody will tell you, go stand on your head for 20 minutes, you'll do it. Someone will tell you to stop smoking, you'll say it's none of your business. That's human nature. I knew people, never that they were suffering from a terrible disease, so they told them if you go to Mexico and they'll sell you apricot pits. And, so that'll cure you. So they, you know, spent thousands of dollars to go to Mexico and get apricot pits, but the apricot pits didn't do it. But when people are, God forbid, ill, or God forbid, in trouble, so then we all grasp at straws. We all grasp at whatever, and therefore there is always a market for these things. So if a guy has a, you know, witch doctors, lots of fake Kabbalists in the world that are making a living. Because people are always searching, and this has an exotic air to it. The Rambam says it was all baloney, it was all fake, killed. So therefore, you have to get the book out of circulation because people were believing in it. They were taking those cures, they were taking those herbs, and instead of improving, instead of becoming healthy, it only made them more ill. And then the Rambam adds that there was an element of paganism to this Sefer Refuos also, because there were gods, you know, patron gods. Once you get into paganism, there's a god for everything. The god for the Chicago Bears, though he's not working too well this year. Everybody has got, you know, so there were gods for every disease. There was a god, right? And so in the Sefer Refuos, they referred you to which god to deal with, right? So it had this element that so it was a double-edged sword. It was on one hand harmful physically because of the fact that it was quack medicine. It was fake. And not only that, but it encouraged paganism amongst the Jewish people because of the fact that you were looking for a patron saint or a god somehow to help cure you in this manner. So the Rambam says that's why they got rid of it. So there are two absolutely contradictory views, not just contradictory as to the reason, but contradictory in Weltanschauung, and how to look at the world as to what the Mishnah meant, what message the Mishnah meant to convey. And this is very common in the writings of the Rambam, is that the Rambam had one view which he fundamentally rooted in Torah and said, well, that's the tradition that I have. The Rambam lists 39 generations from Sinai till his father of the tradition of Torah. Unbroken chain of 39 generations. So he says this is what Moshe Rabbeinu said on Sinai. This is his view of the world. Now, much of the Jewish world disagreed with the Rambam's view. And so it became a debate and a controversy. And that debate and controversy was not limited to the life of the Rambam. Lots of elements of it still exist in the Jewish world today, in the view towards many, many subjects, and many, many problems that face us. But the Rambam, through the פירוש HaMishnayos, was able to deliver this message, and since again it was written in Arabic, so it had wide-scale distribution in the Sephardic world, in the Arabic world, and then when it was translated, it had widespread distribution in the Ashkenazic world as well. The פירוש HaMishnayos, for various reasons, is not a staple of learning in the yeshivot, though it should be. Everyone should take a look at it regarding the subject matter that one is learning in the Talmud, because there the Rambam always cuts to the heart of the matter, and he tells you what the halacha will be, but he also gives you the viewpoint, that he wants to send regarding the matter. If you're interested in Rabbi Kafach's translation of the פירוש HaMishnayos, which I think you should be, it's published by Moshe Rav Kook. It's called פירוש HaMishnayos. It's a 3-volume work, and it really is a tremendous work of scholarship. Kapach, the Yemenite Jews, as we'll discuss, had special relationship with the Rambam and a special allegiance to him. And they had traditions as to what the Rambam meant in his works. And Kapach was the Jew who brought those Yemenite traditions to the general public. He wrote a 22-volume commentary to the Mishneh Torah, which is an outstanding piece of original work, really of genius. And in it, he incorporates again the Yemenite tradition as to what the Rambam meant in that place. So it's interesting to take Kapach's work and take what he has to say and compare it to, let's say, to what Ashkenazic Achronim wrote on the same subject as to what the Rambam meant. Compare it to the Or Sameach, or compare it to Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, or compare it to Reb Isser Zalman Meltzer, or others of the last century, let's say, Ashkenazim, who wrote great scholarly works based on the Rambam. And it's interesting to see that more than one Rambam will rise before your eyes. You'll see, all of a sudden you'll see that the Rambam himself is subject to different interpretations and different views, which is what the greatness of Torah is. The Shivim Ponim La Torah, the 70 faces to Torah, everything is in Torah. And every human idea is there. And Torah provides the framework, in fact, it provides the perspective for all of the great ideas of mankind. And it's only when mankind goes outside the box of Torah, when it violates the norms and the morals that the Torah presented to us, that the ideas become destructive. When it forgets that it's not allowed to kill and steal and abuse and do all those other things, so then great ideas become they become very, very dangerous. Right? Our century is witness to how great ideas went wrong, destroyed tens and tens of millions of people. So the Torah is the framework. And once you're within the framework, so then there's an enormous diversity as to how to look at things, because of the fact that all human beings look at things differently, and because of the fact that there are, in turn, these 70 faces to the Torah. So that's the Pirush HaMishnayos. Next time we'll discuss the Mishneh Torah, the great work of the Rambam in Halacha that became the work of the ages.